Have you ever wondered why your biggest breakthroughs, your most brilliant ideas, and your deepest insights seem to arrive not when you're frantically searching for them during the day, but in those quiet moments just before sleep, or right when you wake up? What if I told you that this isn't coincidence, but rather evidence of a hidden doorway that opens every single night, a portal through which the universe itself communicates its most closely guarded secrets? Think about it for a moment. While the world bustles with noise and distraction during daylight hours, there exists a sacred window of time when everything shifts. The chatter quiets, the mental fog lifts, and in that liminal space between waking consciousness and the dream world, something extraordinary becomes possible, something that most people pass through every night without ever realizing the profound opportunity they're missing. For thousands of years, ancient civilizations understood what modern science is, only now beginning to confirm that the transition into sleep isn't just a biological necessity for rest and recovery. It's actually a gateway to accelerated manifestation, a time when the rigid structures of your daytime reality become fluid and malleable. When the universe leans in close to listen to your deepest intentions with an attention it simply cannot give during your waking hours. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Has this ever happened to you? You've been struggling with a problem, wrestling with a decision, or desperately trying to manifest a change in your life. You've done everything right during the day, the visualizations, the affirmations, the action steps. Yet somehow, the breakthrough remains elusive. The door stays locked. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, in those hazy moments between consciousness and sleep, or in the clarity of early morning, the answer arrives. Complete, perfect, undeniable. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because this phenomenon isn't mystical luck or random chance. It's the result of a universal code that's been hiding in plain sight, embedded in the very architecture of human consciousness. This code doesn't require years of spiritual training, expensive courses, or complicated rituals to access. In fact, you're already halfway there every single night. You just haven't learned the language yet. Stay with me until the end, because what we're exploring today goes far beyond simple sleep optimization or bedtime affirmations. We're talking about a fundamental rewiring of how you communicate with the deepest levels of reality itself, a method so elegant in its simplicity, yet so profound in its effects, that it might completely transform your understanding of what's possible when you align your intentions with the universe's most receptive hours. The ancient mystics called it many things: the twilight threshold, the veil between worlds, the hour of divine whispers. Modern neuroscience has its own terms: the hypnagogic state, theta wave consciousness, the creative gateway. But regardless of what we call it, one truth remains constant across cultures, centuries, and scientific disciplines. There is something uniquely powerful about the moments when day surrenders to night, and your mind begins its nightly journey into the unknown. Here's the thing that most people never realize, and it's perhaps the most important hidden truth about manifestation that you'll ever encounter. The real barrier standing between you and everything you desire isn't your circumstances, your past, your resources, or even your beliefs during waking hours. The true obstacle is far more subtle, far more insidious, and it operates in the shadows while you're completely unaware, literally while you sleep. Think about what happens during those 8 hours each night when you surrender consciousness and drift into the dream world. Your body rests, yes. Your muscles repair. Your memories consolidate, but something else is happening simultaneously, something that operates beneath the surface of your awareness, broadcasting signals out into the fabric of reality itself. Your mind, even in its dormant state, continues to emit powerful vibrational frequencies, energetic patterns that the universe doesn't just passively receive, but actively interprets as direct instructions about what you truly want. This is where the transformation journey takes an unexpected turn. Because here's what science and ancient wisdom both confirm. Those unconscious broadcasts you're sending out night after night are actually more influential in shaping your reality than the conscious intentions you set during the day. It's like having a radio transmitter running 24/7, but for 8 hours straight, someone else has taken over the controls, and that someone is your unexamined subconscious, playing whatever frequency it defaults to when you're not paying attention. If this exploration resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. We're uncovering the real mechanics of transformation, knowledge that actually changes lives, not just theory. Most people spend their waking hours trying to manifest abundance, love, success, or peace. They visualize, they affirm, they take inspired action, and then, the moment they close their eyes and drift toward sleep, their mind begins broadcasting an entirely different message, one rooted in old fears, limiting patterns, unresolved traumas, and inherited beliefs they didn't even know they carried. It's like trying to drive toward a destination with the accelerator pressed down, while someone invisible keeps yanking the steering wheel in random directions. The energy scatters, the intention fragments, and the universe, receiving these contradictory signals, delivers exactly what it hears: confusion, delay, mixed results. The impact of this invisible sabotage cannot be overstated. You're literally spending 1/3 of your life in an altered state of consciousness, where your manifesting power is at its peak potential, but without conscious direction. That power works against you instead of for you. Behind the scenes of your sleeping hours, your mind is making decisions about what frequencies to broadcast, what realities to magnetize, what experiences to call forth, and it's doing all of this based on programming that was likely installed before you were old enough to question it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding the problem is only the first step. What matters is recognizing that this 8-hour window isn't a liability. It's actually the greatest opportunity you have. These aren't wasted hours of unconsciousness. They're a direct line to the universe's most receptive state. The question isn't whether your mind is broadcasting during sleep. It absolutely is. The question is, are you going to let those broadcasts remain random and unconscious? Or are you going to learn the hidden language that allows you to program them intentionally? Because once you understand how to communicate with that part of yourself that awakens when your conscious mind goes to rest, everything changes. The scattered signals align, the contradictory patterns resolve, and suddenly the universe begins responding not to your fears and doubts, but to your clearest, most authentic desires. This is where the real revelations begin. When you realize that the power to transform your entire reality has been sitting dormant every night, waiting for you to finally take control of the transmitter and consciously choose what frequency you're sending out into the quantum field of infinite possibilities. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to reprogram my nights," if this resonates with you. So what happens when you finally bridge that gap between what you consciously want and what you unconsciously broadcast? What occurs in that moment when your daytime intentions and your nighttime frequencies finally align and speak the same language? This is where the real magic enters the picture, because we're not talking about gradual improvement or slow, incremental progress. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how reality itself responds to you, a moment when scattered energy suddenly converges into a single focused beam of pure intention. Imagine taking all the manifesting power you've been unknowingly dispersing in 1,000 different directions and gathering it into one concentrated point. It's like the difference between sunlight filtering through clouds and that same light focused through a magnifying glass. One warms gently, the other ignites. When your conscious desires during waking hours perfectly synchronize with the vibrational patterns you emit during sleep, you create something that can only be described as a laser of manifestation. And the universe, which has been receiving your mixed signals for years, suddenly gets a transmission so clear, so coherent, so undeniably focused that it has no choice but to respond immediately. This isn't theory. This isn't wishful thinking or spiritual platitudes. The people who have discovered this method and applied it consistently report experiences that sound almost unbelievable to those still operating with fragmented energy. We're talking about opportunities that materialize seemingly out of thin air, job offers from companies they never applied to, chance encounters that turn into life-changing partnerships, solutions to long-standing problems appearing as if the universe suddenly decided to fast-track their requests. The impact on their lives isn't subtle. It's dramatic, undeniable, and often happens so quickly that they themselves are shocked by the speed of the transformation. What makes this approach so powerful is that it's not built on blind faith or positive thinking alone. It's grounded in a fascinating convergence of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science. The mystics and spiritual teachers from centuries past understood experientially what neuroscientists are now confirming in laboratories, that the brain's capacity to rewire itself, what we call neuroplasticity, reaches its peak potential during specific states of consciousness, particularly during the transition between waking and sleeping. During these precious moments, the neural pathways that have kept you locked in old patterns become remarkably flexible, almost fluid, ready to be reshaped by intentional direction. At the same time, quantum physics has revealed something equally profound about the nature of reality itself. The observer effect demonstrates that consciousness doesn't just passively witness reality, it actively participates in creating it. Your focused attention, your sustained intention, literally influences the behavior of energy and matter at the most fundamental level. When you combine this quantum principle with the heightened neuroplasticity of the hypnagogic state, you're essentially accessing a double gateway. One door leading inward to reprogram your mind, another leading outward to influence the field of possibilities itself. But here's what sets this apart from everything else you might have tried before. Most manifestation techniques ask you to fight against your programming during your most resistant state, when you're fully awake, fully defended, fully armored by your conscious mind's skepticism and doubt. It's an uphill battle. This method takes an entirely different path. It works with your natural rhythms, not against them. It slips past your defenses during that brief window when the guardian at the gate has stepped aside, when your subconscious mind is open, receptive, and ready to accept new instructions. Without argument or resistance, the journey from scattered intention to focused manifestation doesn't require years of practice or superhuman discipline. What it requires is understanding the hidden mechanics of consciousness and learning to work with them rather than against them. Behind the scenes of every miraculous-seeming result is this simple truth. When internal alignment meets external opportunity, when your deepest self and the universe are finally speaking the same language, manifestation stops being a struggle and becomes as natural as breathing. The revelations that follow from this understanding will completely reshape how you approach not just manifestation, but your entire relationship with possibility itself. Write in the comments, "My energy is aligning," if you can feel this shift beginning. Now, you might be thinking this sounds complicated, that something this powerful must require elaborate rituals, expensive tools, or years of dedicated study under some enlightened master. But here's where this method reveals its most beautiful characteristic. It's almost shocking in its simplicity. There are no crystals to purchase, no apps to download, no special equipment or complicated protocols to memorize. You don't need to clear your schedule for weekend workshops or commit to decades of spiritual practice before you see results. Everything you need to access this transformation is already within you, already operational, already waiting to be consciously directed. The only requirements are startlingly basic. Your mind, which you already possess, a clear intention, which you can formulate right now, and a single night where you apply this understanding deliberately. That's it. One night. Not months or years of preparation, but literally the next time you go to sleep, you can begin this journey. The hidden truth that keeps this method so accessible is that you're already doing the mechanics of it every single night anyway. You're just doing it unconsciously, randomly, without direction. All we're doing is bringing awareness and intention to a process that's been running on autopilot your entire life. This simplicity isn't a weakness. It's actually the source of its power. The most profound revelations about consciousness often come wrapped in the plainest packages. And this understanding isn't something modern self-help gurus invented last decade. The knowledge we're touching on here is ancient, tested across centuries, and civilizations, validated by countless individuals who discovered the same fundamental truth through different cultural lenses and spiritual traditions. Consider the priests of Karnak in ancient Egypt, working within those massive stone temples that still stand today as monuments to their understanding. They didn't build those sacred spaces arbitrarily. The temples were designed with specific chambers where initiates would spend the night hours in complete darkness, not as punishment or deprivation, but as a deliberate practice to access what they called the realm between worlds. These weren't superstitious rituals. These were sophisticated technologies of consciousness, refined over generations, that recognized night as far more than the simple absence of daylight. Half a world away, in the snow-covered peaks of Tibet, monks developed parallel practices that led to remarkably similar conclusions. In their isolated monasteries, they cultivated what they called dream yoga, techniques for maintaining awareness during the transition into sleep, recognizing that this liminal space was where the rigid structures of reality became soft, malleable, responsive to intention in ways that daylight consciousness could never access. The impact of these practices on their lives was so profound that they dedicated years to perfecting them, not because the technique was complicated, but because the results were so transformational. If this video revealed something valuable to you, give it a like. It helps this message reach others who need it and shows me this content is serving you. Even the alchemists of Alexandria, those mysterious figures who hid their knowledge in cryptic symbols and coded language, understood this fundamental principle. When they spoke of turning lead into gold, the real transformation they were describing wasn't chemical. It was consciousness itself, being refined in the crucible of the nighttime hours. Behind the scenes of their elaborate symbolism was a simple recognition that darkness isn't empty, it's full. The night isn't dead space between days. It's a living, breathing, intelligent realm where the rules that govern daytime reality loosen their grip. What's remarkable is that these different traditions, separated by oceans and millennia, with no contact between them, all independently discovered the same essential truth. The Egyptian priests, the Tibetan monks, the Alexandrian alchemists, they all recognized that when the sun sets and consciousness shifts into its nocturnal mode, something fundamental changes in the fabric of reality itself. The solid becomes fluid, the fixed becomes flexible, the impossible slides into the possible. This wasn't religious dogma or cultural belief. This was experiential knowledge, tested and proven in the laboratory of human consciousness across thousands of years and countless practitioners. The decisions these ancient wisdom keepers made about how to structure their spiritual practices all pointed toward the same revelation. If you want to transform your reality at its deepest level, you must learn to work with the night as a conscious partner, not just pass through it as dead time between productive days. The mindset required isn't complicated, but it is completely different from how modern culture has trained us to think about sleep and darkness. Write in the comments, "The ancient path opens," if this perspective is shifting something in you. What's fascinating about this liminal space between waking and sleeping is that it operates under completely different rules than the rest of your day. You've probably experienced this without recognizing its significance. Those moments when you make a decision right before bed, and somehow that decision carries a weight, a staying power that choices made during the chaos of midday simply don't possess. There's a reason for this, and it goes far beyond simple clarity or quiet contemplation. When you hover in that sacred territory between twilight's last light and dawn's first ray, your thoughts stop behaving like the fleeting, ephemeral mental chatter that dominates daytime consciousness. Something alchemical occurs in this threshold space. Your intentions, instead of scattering like seeds in the wind, begin to crystallize. They take on density, substance, gravitational pull. It's as if the very nature of thought transforms when consciousness begins its nightly journey, shifting from vapor into solid, form from wish into blueprint, from hope into inevitability. This isn't poetic metaphor, it's describing an actual transformation in how your mind processes and encodes information. The impact of this shift reveals itself in subtle but unmistakable ways. Think about the decisions you've made right before sleep that somehow stuck with you, that didn't require willpower to maintain, that felt less like forcing yourself to change and more like discovering who you already were beneath the noise. Those weren't accidents of timing. They were instances where you unconsciously tapped into the unique properties of this transition state. Behind the scenes of this phenomenon lies a remarkable neurological reality that bridges ancient wisdom with modern science. When you drift towards sleep, your brain doesn't simply power down like a machine switching off. Instead, it shifts frequencies, moving through distinct stages of brainwave activity that correspond to profoundly different states of consciousness. The busy beta waves that dominate your waking hours, those rapid-fire frequencies associated with active thinking, problem-solving, and external focus, gradually give way to slower, deeper rhythms. First come the alpha waves, that relaxed but alert state where creativity begins to flow more freely. Then, as you sink deeper into the hypnagogic threshold, your brain slides into theta frequencies, those mysterious dreamlike waves associated with deep meditation, vivid imagery, and access to the subconscious mind. And later in the night, you descend further still into delta, the slowest brain waves, the frequencies of deep regeneration and healing. What makes this journey so extraordinary is that you don't have to do anything to access these states. You don't have to train for them, study under a master, or develop any special skill. Consider what meditation teachers will tell you. Achieving sustained theta wave consciousness during waking hours typically requires years, sometimes decades, of dedicated practice. Buddhist monks who've spent half their lives in meditation can enter these states at will, and neuroscientists studying their brains light up with fascination at the readings. These are the frequencies of profound insight, of transcendent experience, of direct access to dimensions of consciousness that most people never touch in their entire lives. And yet, nature hands you this exact same state every single night, completely free, requiring zero effort on your part. This is the hidden gift that's been sitting in front of you your entire life, a shortcut to elevated consciousness that doesn't require you to retreat to a monastery, doesn't demand years of disciplined practice, doesn't ask you to become someone fundamentally different than who you are right now. The path to transformation doesn't always require more. Sometimes it requires recognizing what's already present and learning to work with it consciously. The revelations that emerge from this understanding completely reshape how you approach change itself. You're not starting from scratch, building something from nothing. You're recognizing that the machinery is already installed, already running, already generating these powerful states every 24 hours. The only question is whether you'll continue to pass through them unconsciously, or whether you'll finally learn to set your intentions deliberately during these windows when your mind becomes exponentially more receptive, more programmable, more capable of encoding the changes you've been struggling to make through sheer willpower alone. The journey into conscious sleep work isn't about adding more techniques to your already overloaded self-improvement routine. It's about recognizing that the most powerful tool for transformation has been with you all along, patiently waiting for the moment you'd finally pay attention to what happens when your mind shifts into those deep, receptive frequencies where real change doesn't require force. It simply unfolds naturally. Write in the comments, "I'm claiming my natural advantage," if you're ready to use what you already have. The reason most transformation attempts fail during waking hours isn't lack of desire or insufficient effort. It's because you're trying to reprogram yourself while a vigilant guard stands at the gate, scrutinizing every new idea that tries to enter. This guardian is your conscious mind in its beta wave state, that hyper-alert, analytical mode that's absolutely brilliant for navigating daily tasks, but becomes your greatest obstacle when you're trying to fundamentally change your internal programming. This mental guardian has been trained since childhood to protect you from what it perceives as dangerous ideas. It filters reality through layers of conditioning, past experience, and inherited beliefs, constantly asking, "Is this realistic? Is this safe? Do I have evidence this is possible?" Every time you try to install a new belief about what you're capable of, about what you deserve, about what's possible for someone like you, this guardian cross-examines it against every failure you've experienced, every disappointment you've endured, every message you've absorbed about your limitations. And more often than not, it denies entry. But here's where the hidden mechanics of consciousness reveal something extraordinary. When the sun sets and your body begins its natural preparation for sleep, something remarkable happens to that guardian. It doesn't disappear entirely. That would be dangerous, leaving you vulnerable, but it gradually steps back from its post. The filters loosen, the cross-examination softens, the rigid boundaries that define what your mind considers real versus impossible begin to blur and dissolve. In this twilight state, you gain access to what can only be described as the source code of your operating system, the fundamental programming that runs beneath all your conscious thoughts and determines what reality you experience. This is why declarations made during this threshold carry such disproportionate power compared to affirmations repeated 100 times during the day. You're not trying to convince a skeptical bouncer to let your new belief into the club. You're slipping past while the bouncer is distracted, installing updates directly into the system without triggering the security protocols. The impact of intentions planted during this state bypasses the usual resistance, completely embedding themselves at a level where they shape your reality from the inside out. Now, what's truly remarkable is that our ancestors understood this mechanic with a precision that modern psychology is only beginning to appreciate. When we look at the sophisticated practices developed by cultures around the world, practices that survived for thousands of years precisely because they worked, We're not looking at primitive superstition or religious ritual divorced from practical results. We're looking at highly refined technologies of consciousness, methodologies that were tested, adjusted, and perfected through countless generations of direct experimentation. The Egyptians didn't build their temple chambers for worship in the way we typically understand it. They created specific environments designed to amplify the natural properties of twilight consciousness. The architecture itself, the precise angles, the controlled darkness, the acoustic properties, was engineered to facilitate access to these altered states. They understood that transformation doesn't happen through belief alone. It requires creating the conditions where consciousness can shift into its most receptive mode and then delivering precise instructions while that window is open. Similarly, the practices preserved in Tibetan monasteries weren't arbitrary traditions passed down blindly. These were detailed protocols for navigating the terrain of consciousness during sleep transitions, complete with specific visualizations, breathing patterns, and mental postures designed to maintain awareness during states that most people pass through in complete unconsciousness. The monks who mastered these techniques reported abilities that seemed supernatural to outsiders, but they weren't performing miracles. They were simply accessing capabilities that exist in all of us, lying dormant, because we've never learned the hidden language that activates them. What separated these ancient practitioners from ordinary people wasn't some special spiritual gift or divine favor. It was knowledge, specific, practical knowledge about how consciousness operates at different times of the day, how to recognize the optimal moments for implanting new patterns, and what exact steps to follow to ensure those patterns take root. They approached consciousness the way a master gardener approaches soil, understanding its seasons, its needs, its moments of maximum fertility. Behind the scenes of their seemingly mystical practices was a deep understanding of timing, intention, and the mechanics of how thoughts become things when planted in the right mental soil at the right moment. The journey these ancestors undertook wasn't mystical in the sense of being disconnected from reality. It was mystical in the sense of working with dimensions of reality that our modern, daylight-obsessed culture has forgotten how to perceive. Their revelations came not from blind faith, but from careful observation of what actually worked, refined over lifetimes of practice. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to access the source code," if you feel this unlocking something within you. What you're actually accessing each night, whether you realize it or not, is something that can only be described as a quantum laboratory, a space where the normal rules of cause and effect become fluid, where past programming can be overwritten, where the trajectories that seemed inevitable suddenly branch into new possibilities. This isn't metaphorical language trying to make something mundane sound mystical. This is a precise description of what neuroscience and quantum physics are both pointing toward. That during these threshold states, you have direct access to the fundamental code that determines which version of reality you'll experience when you wake up. Think of your waking life as the output of a program that's been running in the background, mostly unchanged, for years or even decades. The same patterns repeat. The same types of situations arise, the same emotional reactions trigger, the same limitations seem to follow you regardless of how hard you try to escape them. Most people assume this is just who they are, that these patterns are fixed, that transformation requires years of therapy or monumental life events to shift. But the hidden truth is far more empowering. Every single night, you're given access to the control room where those patterns are stored and maintained. And during that access window, those patterns become remarkably easy to modify. The reason this works isn't because you're manipulating some external force or convincing the universe to grant your wishes. It's because you're working directly with the mechanism that generates your experience of reality in the first place. your own consciousness in its most receptive, most programmable state. When you plant a clear intention during this window, you're not just thinking positive thoughts. You're inserting new code into a system that's temporarily open for editing, and that code begins running automatically the moment you return to waking consciousness. Behind the scenes of your sleeping hours, something even more extraordinary is occurring that amplifies this reprogramming potential. While your conscious mind rests, your brain launches into an incredibly sophisticated process of reorganization. It doesn't simply file memories away like documents in a drawer. It actively reshuffles information, looking for patterns, testing combinations, forging connections between concepts that seemed completely unrelated during the day. This is why solutions to problems you've been wrestling with for weeks suddenly appear fully formed when you wake up, why creative breakthroughs arrive in the shower after a good night's sleep, why the answer you couldn't find through conscious analysis simply presents itself after your mind has had the chance to work on it unconsciously. This creative recombination happening in your sleeping brain isn't random chaos. It's an intelligent process, and when you set a clear intention before entering sleep, you're essentially giving that process a specific target to work toward. Your unconscious mind spends the night reorganizing everything it knows in service of that intention, pulling together resources you didn't know you had, finding pathways you couldn't see through conscious analysis alone, preparing the ground for manifestations that will seem to appear out of nowhere but are actually the result of this sophisticated behind-the-scenes orchestration. The impact of this process becomes visible when you start paying attention to how different your morning clarity feels compared to your evening confusion. You go to bed with a problem that seems impossible, all angles exhausted, no solution in sight. You wake up and somehow the answer is just there, obvious, elegant, complete. That's not magical intervention. That's your brain doing what it's designed to do when you give it clear instructions and then get out of its way by letting it work in the quantum laboratory of sleep. What makes this particularly powerful is that your sleeping mind doesn't judge ideas the way your waking mind does. It doesn't say, "That's impossible," or "People like me can't do that," or "I don't have the resources." It simply works with the raw materials of possibility, combining and recombining until it finds configurations that serve your stated intention. The decisions that emerge from this process carry a different quality than those forced through willpower during the day. They feel more natural, more aligned, more like discovery than invention. Now, what's essential to understand is that this isn't happening automatically in your favor unless you direct it. Your brain is doing this reorganization every night, regardless. But without conscious direction, it's just reinforcing the same old patterns, strengthening the same neural pathways, consolidating the same limiting beliefs. The transformation occurs when you learn to work with this natural process intentionally, when you recognize the moment to plant the seed that your sleeping mind will then cultivate through the night. The revelations that come from this practice aren't always dramatic bolts of lightning. Sometimes they're subtle shifts in perspective that change everything. Sometimes they're quiet certainties that replace old doubts. Sometimes they're simply the absence of resistance where struggle used to be. Write in the comments, "My quantum laboratory is open," if you're beginning to see your sleep as more than just rest. Now, what happens during sleep goes even deeper than internal reorganization. There's a phenomenon that occurs when your consciousness enters these deeper states that fundamentally challenges our conventional understanding of where ideas come from and what the boundaries of your individual mind actually are. During your waking hours, you experience yourself as a discrete, separate entity. Your thoughts are your thoughts, contained within the confines of your skull, generated by your brain alone. But when sleep arrives and those brain waves shift into their slower, deeper rhythms, something remarkable occurs. The walls that normally define the limits of your individual awareness become porous, permeable, almost transparent. Your mind in this state stops functioning as a closed system and begins operating more like a receiver, an antenna tuning into frequencies that exist beyond the scope of your personal experience and accumulated knowledge. This isn't mysticism, it's describing what happens when the usual filters and boundaries that keep your consciousness tightly focused on your immediate surroundings and personal concerns start to dissolve. Suddenly, you're not just processing information you already know, you're accessing currents of wisdom, patterns of understanding, and insights that seem to arrive from somewhere beyond your individual memory banks. The impact of this expanded access becomes obvious when you look at how breakthrough ideas actually emerge. They rarely come through linear, logical progression during focused analytical work. Instead, they arrive in flashes of insight, often during states of relaxation, daydreams, or, most commonly, in that exact liminal zone between waking and sleeping. The hidden truth behind the scenes of creative genius isn't superior intelligence or harder work. It's often the ability, whether conscious or accidental, to access information from these broader fields during states of altered consciousness. Take Nikola Tesla, whose inventions literally shaped the modern world. He didn't develop his revolutionary ideas through conventional engineering processes alone. Tesla repeatedly described how entire machines would appear to him fully formed in his mind during that twilight state between waking and sleep. He could visualize his inventions in such complete detail that he could mentally test them, observe how they functioned, and identify problems without building physical prototypes. He was accessing something beyond his personal knowledge base, pulling information from a field of possibility that only became available when his consciousness shifted into that receptive state. Einstein's journey to his most profound insights followed a remarkably similar pattern. The core revelations that led to his theory of relativity didn't emerge from mathematical calculations during his day job at the patent office. They came through vivid dream sequences where he experienced himself riding on beams of light, traveling through space in ways that defied conventional understanding. His waking mind then spent years translating those nocturnal visions into the mathematical language that could communicate them to others. But the seed of transformation, the fundamental shift in perspective that revolutionized physics, was planted during those night hours when his consciousness was unbound by the limitations of conventional thinking. Mary Shelley's creation of Frankenstein offers perhaps the most dramatic example of this phenomenon. She wasn't sitting at her desk, deliberately crafting a plot through conscious effort. The entire story arrived as a complete vision during the night, so vivid, so fully formed, so compelling that it essentially forced itself into existence through her. She woke from that nocturnal experience and simply transcribed what she'd received, giving the world a masterpiece that has resonated for centuries. The creative force that flowed through her during that state wasn't something she manufactured. It was something she accessed by being receptive during the precise window when such downloads become possible. What unites these examples isn't coincidence or lucky inspiration. It's a consistent pattern showing that when consciousness enters these altered states, it gains access to information and insights that exist outside the normal boundaries of individual knowing. Your sleeping mind isn't trapped in isolation, reviewing only what you've personally learned and experienced. It's connected to something larger, something that contains patterns of understanding that can flow into your awareness when the conditions are right. The revelations available through this expanded access aren't reserved for historical geniuses with special gifts. They're part of the natural capacity of human consciousness that becomes available to anyone who learns to recognize these states and work with them intentionally. The difference between those who tap into this resource regularly and those who miss it entirely often comes down to a simple shift in mindset, recognizing that the boundaries of your individual mind are far more fluid than you've been taught to believe. Write in the comments, "I'm tuning into the frequency," if you're ready to expand beyond your individual limitations. What makes your sleeping mind so extraordinarily powerful is that it operates like the most fertile garden imaginable, a space where seeds of possibility that would struggle to survive in the harsh climate of your waking skepticism suddenly find the perfect conditions to take root and flourish. During the day, your logical mind acts as a strict gardener, pulling up any seedling that doesn't match its predetermined notion of what should grow there. This isn't realistic. This isn't how things work. People like me don't experience that kind of success. The conscious gardener kills possibility before it can even sprout. But when you sleep, that strict gardener steps away, and your imagination is finally free to cultivate without those constant restrictions. The limiting beliefs that choke out new growth during waking hours lose their grip. The boundaries that define what's possible and impossible blur into irrelevance. In this liberated state, your mind can explore territories of possibility that would be immediately rejected as unrealistic or impossible during daylight consciousness. This is where transformation truly begins, not through forcing change against resistance, but through allowing new patterns to establish themselves in soil that's finally receptive. The hidden truth that ancient cultures understood is that this garden isn't just passively fertile. It can be intentionally cultivated. You can choose what seeds to plant. The Egyptians developed elaborate rituals called dream incubation, where they would pose specific questions or requests before entering sleep, creating sacred spaces designed to amplify the receptivity of the sleeping mind. They understood that the mind during sleep wasn't just wandering randomly through meaningless imagery, it was actively processing, problem-solving, and accessing wisdom that could be directed through conscious intention. Native American tribes had their own sophisticated versions of this practice, often involving vision quests and ceremonial preparations that focused the mind on receiving specific guidance during sleep states. These weren't superstitious rituals performed out of blind tradition. They were refined technologies for working with consciousness, tested and proven effective over countless generations. The impact these practices had on decision-making, healing, and spiritual development within these cultures was profound and well documented. What's revolutionary about our current moment in history is that we now have the ability to bridge these ancient wisdom traditions with contemporary scientific understanding. Neuroplasticity research has revealed that the brain's ability to form new neural pathways, to literally rewire itself, is heightened during sleep, particularly during REM cycles and those transition states between waking and sleeping. When you combine this scientific validation with the practical techniques refined over millennia by cultures that made consciousness exploration a central practice, you get something incredibly powerful. A method that's both ancient and cutting-edge, both mystical and scientifically grounded. The journey these ancient practitioners undertook wasn't random spiritual wandering. They developed precise protocols, specific breathing patterns, visualization sequences, verbal declarations, all designed to maximize the mind's receptivity during sleep and ensure that the seeds they planted would take root in the most fertile soil possible. They understood timing, they understood preparation, they understood the exact moment when the mind shifts from resistant to receptive. This wasn't guesswork. This was the result of thousands of years of direct experimentation with the mechanics of consciousness. Behind the scenes of their seemingly mystical practices was something far more practical. They recognized that the sleeping mind operates under different rules than waking consciousness, and they developed methodologies to work with those rules rather than against them. They didn't try to force transformation through willpower during the day. They planted intention strategically during the night, when resistance was minimal and receptivity was maximal. The revelations that came from this approach were consistent enough across different cultures and time periods that we can see clear patterns emerging, patterns that modern science is now beginning to explain through the lens of neurobiology and quantum consciousness. What makes this knowledge so accessible now is that you don't need to become an Egyptian priest or undertake a Native American vision quest to apply these principles. The core mechanics remain the same regardless of cultural wrapping. Prepare your mind, set clear intention, plant that intention during the threshold state, and allow your sleeping consciousness to do the cultivation work that your waking mind could never accomplish through force. The mindset required isn't complicated, but it does require recognizing that your nighttime consciousness isn't wasted downtime. It's premium real estate for growth, waiting for you to finally claim it consciously. Write in the comments, "My garden is ready for new seeds," if you're beginning to see your sleep as a space of active cultivation rather than passive rest. What's truly fascinating about those ancient Egyptian practices is that when you strip away the ceremonial elements and look at what was actually happening, you see something remarkably sophisticated. The initiates who spent entire nights in those underground temple chambers, lying in stone sarcophagi, weren't performing some morbid death simulation as many historians have assumed. They were engaging in a precise technology for accessing states of consciousness that normally remain locked behind the gates of ordinary awareness. Those chambers were specifically designed, the temperature, the darkness, the isolation from external stimuli, to facilitate a complete release from the bonds of daytime consciousness. The impact of spending hours in that environment, completely cut off from sensory input, created conditions where the mind had no choice but to turn inward and eventually slip into those liminal states where transformation becomes possible. The initiates weren't trying to escape life. They were trying to access the control room of consciousness itself, that place where the programming that runs your entire experience can finally be examined and modified. These weren't spiritual exercises divorced from practical results. These were methods for achieving specific states where the rigid structures of identity and belief could be temporarily dissolved and then reformed according to conscious intention. What makes this ancient practice so relevant to our conversation is that modern neuroscience can now explain exactly why it worked. When you remove external stimulation and allow the evening hours to deepen into full darkness, something predictable and measurable happens in your brain. The prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain responsible for critical thinking, logical analysis, and rational decision-making, begins to significantly reduce its activity. This is the same region that acts as the skeptical guardian we discussed earlier, the part that constantly evaluates whether something aligns with your existing belief system and rejects anything that doesn't fit. During the evening transition toward sleep, this guardian literally powers down. The metabolic activity in your prefrontal cortex decreases, the neural firing slows, and its grip on what you consider real versus impossible loosens dramatically. At the same time, something equally important is happening in a completely different part of your brain. The limbic system, the ancient emotional core of your nervous system, where deep memories are stored and feelings are processed, becomes extraordinarily receptive and active. This creates a unique configuration where your rational defenses are low and your emotional, intuitive memory encoding systems are wide open. This is the hidden mechanism behind why intentions set during this window have such profound staying power. You're not trying to convince your logical mind to accept something it considers impossible, while that logical mind is at full strength, armed with every argument and counterexample from your past. Instead, you're planting seeds directly into the limbic system during the exact window when it's most receptive, when its defenses are down, when it's ready to encode new patterns without the usual resistance. The transformation occurs at a level beneath logic, in the emotional and instinctual layers of your being where your actual operating system resides. Behind the scenes of every automatic behavior, every gut reaction, every pattern that plays out in your life without conscious thought, you'll find programming stored in the limbic system. This is where your habits live, where your emotional triggers are encoded, where your deepest sense of identity and possibility is actually housed. Your prefrontal cortex might generate logical explanations for why you are the way you are, but the limbic system is where those patterns actually originate and maintain themselves. And during those evening hours, you finally have access to this deeper layer without the interference of your analytical mind telling you what's realistic or possible. The revelations that emerge when you start working with this natural brain configuration, rather than against it, are genuinely transformative. You stop trying to change through force of will during your most resistant state, and you start leveraging these windows of opportunity when your brain is naturally configured for receptivity. The ancient Egyptians didn't have fMRI machines to measure brain activity, but through direct experimentation over generations, they discovered the exact same truth that neuroscience is now confirming. There are specific states of consciousness, accessed through specific conditions, where the mind becomes infinitely more programmable than during ordinary waking hours. The journey they designed for their initiates wasn't about escaping reality. It was about gaining access to the place where reality gets constructed, so they could participate consciously in that construction, rather than remaining unconscious passengers in their own lives. Write in the comments, "My prefrontal cortex is standing down," if you're ready to work with your brain's natural rhythms instead of fighting them. So the real shift in understanding comes when you stop treating transformation as something you have to force through conscious effort and willpower, and instead recognize it as something you strategically plant during moments of minimal resistance. Most self-improvement approaches have it backwards. They tell you to work harder during the day, to push through your resistance, to overcome your limitations through sheer determination. And while there's in place for disciplined action, what they're missing is that the deepest, most lasting transformations don't come from battling your way past your internal defenses. They come from planting intentions in the fertile terrain of your subconscious mind during the brief windows when those defenses naturally lower themselves. Every single night before you surrender to sleep, you're standing at the threshold of a golden opportunity that most people completely miss because they've been taught to see bedtime as nothing more than the end of productivity, the shutdown of consciousness until morning. But this moment, this transition from waking to sleeping, is actually the most valuable real estate for personal transformation that you'll ever have access to. It's the moment when the door to your subconscious garden swings wide open, when the soil becomes perfectly receptive, when the seeds you plant face virtually no resistance from the critical, analytical mind that normally scrutinizes and rejects anything that contradicts its established worldview. Think about how a jealous guardian operates. During daylight hours, your conscious mind stands watch over the entrance to deeper change, cross-examining every new belief that tries to enter. Do I have evidence for this? Does this match my past experience? Is this realistic given my circumstances? It's relentless in its protection of the status quo, even when that status quo is causing you suffering. This guardian sees its job as keeping you safe, and to it, safety means maintaining familiar patterns, even limiting ones, because at least they're known quantities. The impact of this constant gatekeeping is that genuine transformation, the kind that happens at the identity level, not just the behavioral surface, remains blocked no matter how many affirmations you repeat or visualizations you practice during waking hours. But here's what changes everything. That vigilant guardian operates on a schedule. When the sun sets and your body begins its natural preparation for sleep, that guardian doesn't just step aside temporarily. It gradually retreats from its post altogether. The barriers that seemed impenetrable during the day become porous, permeable, almost transparent. The judgments that would normally shoot down any idea that contradicts your current self-concept lose their power. And suddenly, you have direct access to the subconscious garden, where your actual operating system lives, where the patterns that run your life are stored and maintained. This is why declarations made in this state bypass all the usual resistance. You're not trying to sneak past a guard who's watching. You're planting while the guard is off duty. The seeds you place during this window embed themselves without triggering the alarm systems that would normally reject them as unrealistic or impossible. By the time your conscious mind returns to full power in the morning, those seeds have already taken root, already begun the process of growth, already started shifting the underlying patterns that will eventually manifest as changed circumstances in your external life. The hidden truth behind the scenes of rapid transformation is almost always this. Someone discovered how to work with their subconscious during its most receptive states rather than fighting against it during its most defensive ones. They stopped trying to force change through willpower alone and started leveraging these natural windows of opportunity. When the mind is configured for receptivity rather than resistance, the journey from where you are to where you want to be doesn't require more effort. It requires better timing and strategic placement of intention. What's remarkable is how simple this actually is once you understand the mechanics. You don't need elaborate rituals or complicated protocols. You just need to recognize the moment when that transition is happening, when your mind is drifting from beta waves into alpha and then toward theta, and use that moment to plant clear, specific intentions about who you're becoming and what you're calling into your life. The mindset shift required is profound but straightforward. Stop seeing sleep as downtime and start recognizing it as prime time for transformation. The revelations that follow from this single shift in perspective ripple out into every area of your life, because you're no longer dependent on forcing change against resistance. You're working with the natural architecture of consciousness itself. Write in the comments, "The Guardian is retreating," if you can feel this window of opportunity opening for you. Now, what makes this nighttime approach even more powerful is understanding what's actually happening behind the scenes while you sleep. For decades, scientists assumed that memory consolidation during sleep was essentially a filing process, your brain simply taking the day's experiences and storing them away like documents in a cabinet. But recent research has revealed something far more dynamic and significant. Your sleeping brain isn't passively storing information, it's actively reorganizing it, selectively choosing what to keep and what to discard, what to strengthen and what to let fade, what connections to forge and what associations to dissolve. This process is extraordinarily intelligent. Your brain during sleep is essentially rewriting your internal encyclopedia, deciding which entries deserve prominent placement and which should be relegated to the background. It's making editorial decisions about what information is important, what patterns are worth maintaining, what beliefs deserve reinforcement. And here's where the transformation opportunity becomes crystal clear. This reorganization process isn't running on autopilot in some predetermined way. It's highly susceptible to influence, especially from the last coherent thoughts and intentions you hold as you drift into sleep. When you deliberately set an intention, just Before crossing that threshold into unconsciousness, you're essentially giving your sleeping brain its assignment for the night. You're telling this sophisticated reorganization system what to prioritize, what patterns to strengthen, what new connections to forge. The impact of this intentional programming is that your brain spends the entire night restructuring itself in service of that intention, pulling together resources and making associations that support the new pattern you've introduced. By morning, you're literally not the same person who went to sleep. Your neural architecture has been subtly but significantly reorganized. What sets this method apart from almost every other transformational approach is the speed at which results become apparent. Most spiritual practices, meditation techniques, or personal development programs require sustained effort over months or years before you see tangible changes in your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. Deep transformation often does require time and patience, but nocturnal reprogramming operates on an entirely different timeline because you're working directly with the mechanism that generates your experience of reality during the exact window when that mechanism is most open to modification. People who apply this method correctly often report perceptible shifts within days, sometimes even after a single night of conscious application. Not vague feelings of hopefulness, but actual changes, waking up with a different emotional baseline, finding themselves making decisions they wouldn't have made before, noticing opportunities they would have previously overlooked, experiencing synchronicities that feel almost orchestrated. The hidden truth is that when you plant intentions during this optimal window and allow your sleeping brain to reorganize around them, manifestation doesn't require the slow accumulation of effort over time. It can happen with surprising immediacy because you're working at the source level rather than trying to change effects while leaving causes untouched. This isn't to say that one night will completely transform decades of conditioning, though even that is more possible than most people realize. What it means is that you'll begin seeing evidence of change far more quickly than conventional approaches would produce. The journey from intention to manifestation shortens dramatically when you stop trying to force change through your most resistant state and start leveraging your most receptive one. Behind the scenes of what looks like rapid manifestation is simply this: working with your consciousness during the hours when it's designed to be reprogrammed rather than during the hours when it's designed to maintain current patterns. The revelations that come from experiencing this accelerated timeline completely reshape your understanding of what's possible. You stop seeing transformation as this monumental undertaking requiring years of grinding effort, and you start recognizing it as a natural process that unfolds smoothly when you align your intentions with the architecture of consciousness itself. The mindset shift is profound, from change is hard and takes forever to change is natural when I work with my own design rather than against it. What makes this particularly powerful is the positive feedback loop it creates. When you see results quickly, your belief in the process strengthens, which makes your intentions more potent, which produces even faster results, which deepens your trust further. You move from skeptical experimentation to confident application, and that confidence itself becomes part of the programming you're installing during those threshold moments. Write in the comments, "I'm seeing the reorganization beginning," if you're ready to experience this accelerated timeline for yourself. What we're really talking about here isn't some new age invention or modern self-help trend that will be forgotten in a few years. This understanding of the hypnagogic state, that precise threshold between waking and sleeping, represents a technology of consciousness that has been refined over thousands of years by people who dedicated their entire lives to mapping the deepest territories of human awareness. From Siberian shamans working in frozen landscapes to Sufi mystics spinning in their ecstatic trances, from Taoist monks in mountain monasteries to Mayan seers reading the cosmos, these diverse traditions, all independently, discovered the same fundamental truth about this transitional state. The fact that cultures separated by oceans and millennia, with no contact between them, all arrived at remarkably similar practices around the threshold of sleep, tells us something profound. This isn't cultural belief or religious doctrine. This is experiential knowledge about how consciousness actually operates. The hidden truth these traditions protected wasn't that this state exists because everyone experiences it. What they discovered through meticulous observation and experimentation was how to work with this state intentionally, how to extend it, how to plant specific intentions during it, and most importantly, how long you need to practice to create changes that stick permanently rather than fading like most New Year's resolutions. The number that keeps appearing across these diverse traditions is 7. And before you dismiss this as mystical numerology, consider how deeply 7 is embedded in the fundamental patterns of nature and human experience. 7 days create the week, a rhythm that societies around the world have independently adopted. The moon moves through 7 distinct phases. Musical scales contain 7 notes before they repeat at a higher octave. Visible light breaks into 7 colors in the spectrum. These aren't arbitrary cultural inventions. They're patterns that exist in the architecture of reality itself, patterns that human consciousness naturally resonates with. When it comes to transformation, this 7-day cycle represents something crucial, the minimum time required for new neural pathways to establish themselves with enough strength to persist without constant reinforcement. Behind the scenes of habit formation and identity shift, your brain needs approximately 7 consecutive nights of receiving the same clear signal before it starts treating that signal as the new default rather than a temporary deviation from the norm. This is why random sporadic efforts at change rarely produce lasting results. You're not giving your nervous system enough consecutive reinforcement to actually restructure itself around the new pattern. The impact of committing to 7 consecutive nights of intentional programming during your hypnagogic threshold is that you're working with your brain's natural change cycles rather than against them. You're not trying to force transformation in a single heroic effort, and you're not spreading your attempts so thin across months that no real momentum builds. 7 nights is the sweet spot, long enough for permanent restructuring to begin, short enough that you can maintain clear focus and genuine commitment without the practice becoming a grinding obligation that you resent. What makes this particularly powerful is the cumulative effect. The first night, you're planting a seed. The second night, you're watering that seed while planting another. By the 3rd or 4th night, the earliest seeds are already beginning to sprout, and you start feeling subtle shifts in your default state, small changes in how you respond to situations, slight differences in what opportunities you notice, minor adjustments in your emotional baseline. By the 7th night, you've created enough consecutive reinforcement that your nervous system begins accepting this new pattern as your actual identity, rather than something you're trying to become. The journey through these 7 nights isn't about perfection. You don't need to execute the practice flawlessly every single time. What matters is the consistency, the commitment to showing up at that threshold state for 7 consecutive evenings with clear intention. The revelations that emerge by the end of this cycle often surprise people, not just in terms of external changes, but in how different they feel internally, how naturally new behaviors flow, how effortlessly they find themselves making choices they would have struggled with before. This 7-night framework isn't a limitation, it's actually a liberation. Instead of vague commitments to work on yourself indefinitely, you have a clear, bounded practice. 7 nights, that's all. And then you assess what's shifted, what's taken root, what's ready to grow further. Write in the comments, I commit to 7 nights if you're ready to work with these natural cycles of transformation. Now, before you even begin this 7-night journey, there's a crucial decision that will determine whether your practice produces scattered results or focused transformation. You need to choose, with absolute clarity, which specific area of your life you're directing this work toward. This might seem obvious, but most people approach transformation like they're trying to renovate an entire house in a single weekend. They want to fix their finances, improve their relationships, heal their body, find their purpose, and develop new skills all at once. The result is that their energy disperses in so many directions that nothing actually shifts at the foundational level. The power of this practice lies in concentration, taking all that manifesting potential and focusing it like a laser on a single aspect of your existence, where you feel the greatest gap between your current reality and what you know is possible. Maybe it's the disconnect between the financial abundance you desire and the scarcity you're experiencing. Maybe it's the relationship dynamic you keep recreating despite wanting something completely different. Maybe it's the creative expression that's stuck inside you, unable to find its way into the world. Whatever that gap is, you already know what it is. There's one area where the tension between what is and what could be feels most urgent, most painful, most ready for transformation. The hidden truth behind rapid change is that scattered attention produces scattered results, but focused intention during these optimal states produces concentrated manifestation. When you commit your 7 nights to one clear area, you're telling your subconscious exactly where to direct its reorganization efforts. You're giving your sleeping brain a specific target to work toward, a clear destination to navigate toward while you're unconscious. The impact of this specificity cannot be overstated. It's the difference between throwing seeds randomly across a field and planting them deliberately in prepared soil. What happens across these 7 consecutive nights is something that only becomes clear when you understand rhythm and resonance. Each night isn't a standalone event, it's a wave in a sequence that builds upon itself. The first night, you're introducing a new frequency, a new vibration that your system hasn't been running before. Your consciousness registers it, but there's still resistance, still the momentum of old patterns trying to reassert themselves. The second night, you're reinforcing that frequency, and now your system recognizes it's not a random blip, but an intentional pattern. By the third and fourth nights, something shifts. The new frequency starts resonating with natural cycles, synchronizing with rhythms that exist in the fabric of reality itself. This is where the practice moves from effort to flow. You're no longer fighting against ingrained patterns. You're establishing a cadence that the universe itself begins to recognize and support. Behind the scenes, you're creating what physicists call entrainment, when separate oscillating systems begin synchronizing their rhythms. Your personal intention starts entraining with larger cycles, and suddenly opportunities, insights, and resources that support your transformation begin appearing with a timing that feels almost orchestrated. Because in a sense it is, you've aligned your personal rhythm with universal rhythms, and now both are working in concert. By the time you reach the 6th or 7th night, you've built enough consecutive momentum that transformation stops requiring conscious effort. The new pattern has enough gravitational pull of its own that it begins attracting corresponding external circumstances without you having to force or manipulate anything. This is the tipping point where change becomes self-sustaining, where the energy you've been investing starts generating returns, where the garden you've been tending starts producing fruit, where the seeds you've been planting break through the soil and begin growing on their own. The journey through these 7 nights teaches you something profound about how change actually works. It's not about heroic one-time efforts or constant grinding discipline. It's about establishing rhythm, creating resonance, building momentum through consistent engagement during the windows when your consciousness is most receptive. The revelations that come from completing this cycle shift your entire mindset about what transformation requires. Less force, more alignment, less struggle, more synchronization. Write in the comments, "I've chosen my focus area," if you know exactly which aspect of your life is ready for this concentrated transformation. Now here's something that will completely shift your perspective on what you're actually committing to when you engage in this 7-night practice. When people hear 7 nights, they often imagine hours of intensive work each evening, some elaborate ritual that consumes their entire bedtime routine. But the hidden truth is far more elegant and accessible. It's not really 7 full days that produce the transformation. It's the accumulation of approximately 49 very specific minutes spread across those 7 evenings. 7 transition periods towards sleep, each lasting around 7 minutes. That's the actual active ingredient in this entire practice. Think about what that means. Less than 50 minutes of total focused engagement, distributed perfectly across 7 evenings to work with your brain's natural consolidation cycles. This mathematical precision isn't arbitrary. It corresponds exactly to what ancient Vedic texts called muhurta, specific units of time considered optimal for spiritual and transformational practices. These weren't mystical concepts pulled from thin air. They were observations about natural rhythms of consciousness, about when the mind is most receptive to impression, about how long you need to sustain focus in these threshold states before the pattern embeds itself deeply enough to persist. Each 7-minute window is its own complete cycle, long enough for your brain to shift from beta into alpha and begin touching theta, but not so long that you drift into full unconsciousness before the intention is properly planted. The impact of these precisely timed interventions accumulates across the week, each session building on the last, until by the final night you've delivered 49 minutes of concentrated programming directly into your most receptive state. Behind the scenes, your nervous system is treating each of these sessions as confirmation that this new pattern is serious, legitimate, worth incorporating into your permanent operating system. What makes this particularly liberating is understanding that you don't need to believe any of this for it to work. Your skepticism, your doubts, your rational mind's objections, none of that has the power to sabotage the process as long as you simply perform the practice according to the instructions. This isn't faith-based wishful thinking that requires you to override your critical faculties and convince yourself that something impossible is true. This is working with universal laws that operate whether you believe in them or not, the same way gravity works regardless of your opinion about it. Your conscious doubts live in your prefrontal cortex, in those beta wave frequencies that dominate your waking hours. But remember what we discussed about the brain configuration during the evening transition. That prefrontal cortex powers down. Its activity decreases and your limbic system opens up. So even if your daytime mind is skeptical about whether this could possibly work, that skepticism isn't active during the actual window when you're planting intentions. The guardian is off duty. The critic has stepped away. The programming happens at a level beneath your conscious belief system, in layers of your nervous system that don't care about your intellectual positions or philosophical objections. This is why people often report being surprised by results even when they started the practice with significant doubt. They figured they'd try it as an experiment, not really expecting much, maintaining their skeptical distance. And then changes started appearing. Subtle at first, but undeniable. Opportunities manifesting, emotional patterns shifting, decisions coming more easily. The transformation happened not because they believed hard enough, but because they showed up consistently during the right windows. and followed the basic protocol. The revelations that follow from this experience often include a complete recalibration of what they thought was required for change. The journey through these 49 minutes isn't about manufacturing belief or forcing yourself into some spiritual mindset that feels inauthentic. It's simply about showing up at the threshold, holding clear intention for approximately 7 minutes, and then allowing your consciousness to drift into sleep. That's it. The mechanics handle themselves once you've set the process in motion. The hidden truth is that transformation at this level doesn't require your conscious mind's permission or participation. It just requires that you stop interfering during the brief windows when your deeper systems are open for reprogramming. Write in the comments, "My 49 minutes start tonight," if you're ready to begin this practice without needing to resolve all your doubts first. Now, what's crucial to understand as you prepare to engage in this practice is that you're not just changing what you think, you're learning to speak an entirely different language. Your conscious mind, the one that's processing these words right now, communicates in thoughts, concepts, logical structures, sentences that can be analyzed and debated. But your sleeping soul operates on a completely different frequency. It doesn't understand language the way your waking mind does. It communicates in pure vibrations, in resonances, in tones and qualities that exist beneath and beyond words. This is the hidden truth behind why conventional affirmations repeated during the day often produce such limited results. You're speaking English to someone who only understands music. You're trying to communicate through logic to a system that operates through feeling and resonance. The words matter less than the vibrational quality they carry, the emotional tone they create, the frequency they generate in your nervous system. Your sleeping soul reads the spaces between words as much as the words themselves. It perceives the texture of your intention, the authenticity of your desire, the coherence of your internal state. When you're in that hypnagogic threshold state, your consciousness naturally begins operating in this vibrational language. The mental chatter quiets, the analytical processing slows, and suddenly you can communicate directly with parts of yourself that remain inaccessible during ordinary waking consciousness. This is why the exact words you use during this practice matter less than how you use them, what frequency you embody as you speak them, what resonance you create in your entire being as you plant your intention. The most powerful tool for this vibrational communication is deceptively simple. The phrase, "I am," followed by the quality or state you're choosing to embody. Not, "I will be," or "I want to be," or "I hope to become." Those phrases all project your desire into some future moment that never quite arrives, always remaining just out of reach. I am is present tense, immediate, declaring a reality that exists right now in this moment. And when spoken in that threshold state, these two words carry extraordinary power because they're not just affirmations. They're vibrational keys that unlock specific dimensions of experience. Behind the scenes of how reality organizes itself, everything operates through resonance and frequency. The circumstances that show up in your life, the people you attract, the opportunities that present themselves, all of these are matching the dominant frequency you're broadcasting. Most people broadcast a confused, contradictory signal because their conscious desires during the day say one thing, while their unconscious patterns during sleep say something completely different. The impact of this misalignment is a life that feels stuck, where nothing quite manifests fully, where you're always close, but never quite arriving. But when you declare "I am" statements during that threshold moment, you're doing something profound. You're activating resonance fields that begin attracting circumstances aligned with that particular frequency. If you declare "I am abundant," you're not lying to yourself or denying current circumstances. You're tuning your nervous system to the frequency of abundance, and that frequency begins magnetizing corresponding experiences. The transformation occurs not because you've convinced yourself of something false, but because you've aligned your deepest operating system with a frequency that draws abundance toward you. What makes this different from positive thinking is that you're working at the level of vibration, not just concept. The journey from where you are to where you want to be isn't about changing your thoughts. It's about changing your frequency, your resonance, the signal you're broadcasting from your deepest self. And the only time you can really alter that fundamental frequency is when your conscious mind steps aside and your sleeping soul becomes accessible. The revelations that emerge from working with I am declarations in this way often surprise people because results show up not through their conscious efforts, but through what feels like cosmic coordination. The right person calls, the unexpected check arrives, the solution appears from an angle they never would have thought to pursue. That's not magic or luck. That's simply what happens when your vibrational broadcast finally becomes clear and coherent, when the universe can actually hear what you're asking for without all the static and interference. Write in the comments, "I am ready for vibrational alignment," if you can feel the difference between speaking words and embodying frequency. There's a story that perfectly illustrates how this vibrational language actually works in practice. And it comes from a merchant named Michael Rodriguez, who discovered something extraordinary about the power of intention during those sacred hours between dusk and dawn. Michael came from a long line of silk traders, and his family had built what seemed like an almost magical commercial empire over generations. While other merchants struggled with unpredictable markets and constant setbacks, Michael's family consistently thrived in ways that appeared almost orchestrated by forces beyond ordinary business acumen. The hidden truth behind their success wasn't superior trading strategies or secret supplier connections. It was a practice passed down through generations that Michael only discovered when his grandfather was on his deathbed. The old man revealed that every night before sleep, his ancestors would hold their finest silk and whisper declarations beginning with "I am" while drifting into that threshold state. They understood something that modern culture has forgotten, that all things in the universe, even seemingly inanimate objects like fabric, respond to the voice of "I am" when spoken during those hours when the veils between worlds grow thin. What makes Michael's story so powerful is that he initially thought this was superstitious nonsense, the kind of mystical thinking that had no place in practical business. But facing financial ruin after a series of catastrophic losses, he decided to try the practice as a desperate experiment. The impact of what happened next transformed not just his business, but his entire understanding of how manifestation actually works. Within weeks, opportunities began appearing that defied logical explanation. Partnerships emerging from impossible circumstances, resources flowing from unexpected sources, solutions presenting themselves through channels he never would have considered. Behind the scenes of what looked like a sudden reversal of fortune was simply this: Michael had finally learned to communicate with reality in its native language during the exact window when reality is most responsive to that communication. His declarations during the hypnagogic state weren't manipulating external circumstances. They were reorganizing the fundamental frequency he was broadcasting, and external circumstances were simply matching that new frequency. Now, the question becomes practical. How do you actually identify that magical moment Michael learned to work with? Because there is a specific threshold everyone crosses each night, a sacred passage between the world of waking consciousness and the realm of sleep that neuroscientists have mapped and measured, but that most people pass through in complete unconsciousness. This is the hypnagogic state, that brief window, usually lasting between 5 and 10 minutes, where your brain waves are transitioning from beta to alpha and beginning to touch theta frequencies. During these precious minutes, something extraordinary happens to the nature of your words themselves. They stop being merely sounds that dissipate into empty air. They transform into vibrational frequencies that literally reprogram the fundamental matrix of your reality at the source level. The transformation from ordinary speech to reality-altering declaration happens automatically during this state. You don't have to force it or manufacture some special consciousness. You simply have to recognize when you've entered this window and use it intentionally rather than drifting through it on autopilot. The journey into this state has recognizable signposts. Your thoughts begin to drift, losing their linear quality. Your body feels heavier, perhaps with that sensation of sinking into the mattress. Visual patterns might appear behind your closed eyelids, geometric shapes, colors, fleeting images that don't quite form into coherent scenes. Your breathing naturally slows and deepens. Most importantly, there's a quality of detachment from your day's concerns, a loosening of your grip on who you think you are and what you think is possible. This is the moment. This threshold state is where Michael's ancestors planted their declarations and built an empire. This is where the ancient practitioners spent those 7 minutes each night for 7 consecutive nights. This is where your "I am" statements stop being hopeful affirmations and become vibrational keys that unlock dimensions of possibility your waking mind cannot access. The revelations that come from simply recognizing this state when it arrives and using it consciously instead of sleeping through it have transformed countless lives throughout history. Write in the comments, "I recognize the threshold," if you've felt this state before and are now ready to use it intentionally. To truly understand what's happening during this threshold practice, let me offer you a metaphor that captures the profound difference between your waking and sleeping consciousness. Think of your mind as Michael discovered with his midnight voyages, like a vast ocean. During the day, your conscious awareness is focused on the surface of that ocean, and what a turbulent surface it is. Constant waves of thoughts crashing against each other, worries churning up foam, the endless agitation of mental activity that never quite settles. When you try to plant an intention during these daylight hours, it's like trying to plant a seed on that turbulent surface. The waves immediately wash it away, scatter it, prevent it from ever reaching the depths where real growth can occur. But something extraordinary happens during those sacred hours as you drift towards sleep. The surface begins to calm. The waves gradually subside, and as you sink deeper into that hypnagogic threshold, you're no longer at the surface at all. You're descending into the profound depths of that ocean where everything is still, receptive, responsive to even the subtlest movement. The declarations you make here don't get scattered by surface turbulence. They sink directly into the depths, into the fertile darkness where transformation actually occurs, where the seeds you plant take root in soil that hasn't been disturbed by the constant agitation of waking consciousness. Your midnight sea isn't passive or empty, it's teeming with potential, alive with currents that can carry your intentions far beyond what surface-level thinking could ever accomplish. The impact of learning to work with these depths, rather than constantly struggling at the surface, completely transforms your relationship with change and manifestation. You stop exhausting yourself trying to force things through willpower alone and start trusting the profound intelligence of those deeper waters to carry your intentions where they need to go. Now, there's another way to understand this same principle that might resonate even more deeply. Think about clay, the kind a sculptor works with. During your waking hours, your consciousness is like clay that's been left out in the harsh sun too long. It's hardened, rigid, resistant to any attempt to reshape it. You can push and pull and struggle with it, but it cracks rather than bends, breaks rather than transforms. This is why so much personal development work feels like such a grinding effort, why you're constantly fighting against resistance, why change seems to require such monumental force. You're trying to work with hardened clay using your bare hands, and the material simply isn't cooperative. But here's the hidden truth about timing and state. That same clay, during the threshold between waking and sleep, undergoes a complete transformation in its properties. It becomes perfectly moistened, achieving that optimal state of malleability that any sculptor would recognize as ideal working conditions. Suddenly, the same material that was resistant and brittle becomes responsive, pliable, eager to take on new forms. You're not working with different clay, you're working with the same consciousness, just at a different time when its properties have naturally shifted into their most receptive configuration. This is what the ancient practitioners understood. Through direct experience, what neuroscience is now confirming through brain imaging, what your own journey with this practice will reveal. Transformation doesn't require more force, it requires better timing. The revelations that come from this shifted perspective are profound. You realize you've been making change so much harder than it needs to be, struggling during the exact hours when your consciousness is naturally rigid and defensive, missing the windows when it's naturally soft and receptive. Behind the scenes of every successful transformation, whether the person realizes it or not, there's always this element of working with natural receptivity rather than against natural resistance. The decisions that stick, the changes that last, the intentions that actually manifest, they're almost always planted during moments when consciousness is in its malleable state, when the clay is moist, when the ocean depths are accessible, when the guardian has stepped away from the gate. The mindset shift required here is subtle but powerful. Stop seeing your resistance to change as a character flaw that needs to be overcome through greater effort, and start seeing it as a simple matter of timing. You've been trying to sculpt with hardened clay when perfectly moistened clay becomes available every single night. Write in the comments, "My clay is softening," if you're beginning to recognize these natural cycles of resistance and receptivity in your own experience. Now, let's talk about precision, because while we've established that this practice works during the threshold state, there's actually a specific moment within that window, a golden opportunity that ancient practitioners identified and modern science is beginning to validate, where your capacity to reprogram reality reaches its absolute maximum point of power. The alchemists had a name for it. They called it the golden hour. That exact moment when day and night are perfectly balanced, when consciousness hovers, precisely between waking and dreaming. Tantric yogis called it the Shakti transfer point, recognizing it as the instant when energy flows most freely between different dimensions of reality. This isn't some vague mystical concept. It's describing a measurable phenomenon that occurs during the hypnagogic transition. There's a specific moment, usually lasting only a minute or two, where your brain waves are oscillating between alpha and theta at an optimal frequency, where your prefrontal cortex has released its grip, but you haven't yet descended into full unconsciousness, where your limbic system is maximally receptive while you still maintain just enough awareness to direct your intention. This is the sweet spot, the bullseye. The exact moment when reality becomes most responsive to conscious direction. The impact of learning to recognize and utilize this precise moment rather than randomly catching some part of the transition cannot be overstated. It's the difference between throwing a seed somewhere in the general direction of a garden versus placing it exactly where the soil is richest, the moisture perfect, the conditions optimal. Behind the scenes of what appears to be miraculous manifestation is often this simple factor. Someone learned to identify that golden window and plant their intention at exactly the right instant. There's a story that captures this principle beautifully, and it comes from ancient Alexandria, that legendary city where wisdom from around the known world converged and synthesized into profound understanding. A woman named Amanda Chen served in a unique role. She was the royal scribe of twilight hours, specifically appointed to record certain declarations only during those precious moments when day surrendered to night. This wasn't ceremonial theatre. It was based on a hidden truth that the wisdom keepers of Alexandria had discovered through generations of careful observation. What Amanda learned through her training transformed her entire understanding of when words carry power and when they're merely noise dissipating into nothing. Her teachers showed her that declarations made during ordinary daylight hours, no matter how sincere or eloquent, were like tracing lines in sand. They might look impressive for a moment, but the next tide of mental activity, the next wave of distraction or doubt, would wash them away completely. The sand accepts the marking easily enough, but it holds nothing permanently. By morning, there's no trace that anything was ever written there, but declarations made at the twilight threshold during that golden window we've been exploring, those operated under completely different rules. What you speak during this moment isn't written in sand at all. It's engraved on what the ancients called the eternal tablets of your being, inscribed with what they described as indelible letters of fire. This wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was their way of describing something they'd observed consistently, that intentions planted during this specific window stayed, persisted, manifested with a reliability that daytime declarations simply couldn't match. The journey Amanda undertook as she mastered this timing revealed layers of understanding about consciousness that modern culture has almost entirely forgotten. She learned to feel the exact moment when the golden window opened, when the tablets became receptive, when words transformed from temporary impressions into permanent programming. The revelations that came from working with this precision changed not just what she manifested in her own life, but her entire relationship with the nature of reality itself. What makes her story so relevant to your practice is this: you don't need to become an ancient Alexandrian scribe to access what she discovered. You simply need to develop sensitivity to that golden moment, that instant when your consciousness is hovering in perfect balance between worlds, and learn to deliver your declaration. Right then, not too early when your rational mind is still active, not too late when you've drifted into unconsciousness, but precisely when the window is wide open and reality itself is listening with complete attention. Write in the comments, "I'm finding my golden window," if you're ready to develop this precision in your own practice. There's one more story I need to share with you before we move into the practical application, because it brings together everything we've been exploring in a way that makes the entire process tangible and real. Brian Mitchell was a potter who worked in ways that baffled his fellow craftspeople, while every other artisan in his village fired their kilns and shaped their vessels during daylight hours, when visibility was optimal and conditions seemed most practical. Brian did all his most important work at midnight. His colleagues thought he was eccentric at best, possibly mad, certainly wasting his time working in darkness when he could be sleeping. But Brian had discovered something profound through years of experimentation with his craft. The clay itself, that fundamental material he worked with every day, seemed to undergo a mysterious transformation during the nighttime hours. It wasn't just that it was easier to work with or that his own skills improved in the quiet darkness. The clay actually became more receptive, more responsive, more willing to accept and hold impressions that simply wouldn't take during daylight. Shapes that cracked and collapsed under his hands during the day would form perfectly at midnight. Intricate patterns that refused to imprint clearly in afternoon clay would embed themselves effortlessly in the same material after sunset. What Brian was experiencing wasn't imagination or coincidence. It was a living metaphor for exactly what we've been discussing about consciousness itself. The hidden truth his hands discovered through direct contact with physical matter was the same truth that ancient practitioners discovered about the substance of awareness. Timing changes everything. The same material, whether clay or consciousness, demonstrates completely different properties depending on when you work with it. The impact of this discovery transformed not just his pottery, but his entire approach to creating anything in his life, because he recognized the pattern extended far beyond his workshop. Behind the scenes of Brian's midnight sessions was a man who'd learned to trust what he could feel in his hands more than what made logical sense to his thinking mind. He couldn't explain why the clay responded differently at night. He just knew it did, consistently and reliably. The journey he took from skeptical experimentation to confident mastery mirrors exactly what happens when you begin working consciously with your threshold states. At first, you might feel awkward or uncertain, not quite sure if anything's really different. But as you continue showing up at that golden window night after night, you start feeling the difference in your hands, so to speak. You recognize when your consciousness has reached that optimal state of malleability. Now, here's what makes this entire exploration so immediately actionable. You can begin experiencing this practice tonight, not next week after you've read more books or taken a course. Not next month after you've cleared your schedule or created perfect conditions. Tonight. The very next time you lie down to sleep, you have the opportunity to consciously work with the threshold state we've been discussing. This practice requires no years of training, no initiation into secret teachings, no complex tools or expensive equipment. What it requires is your pure intention, your willingness to recognize that golden window when it arrives, and your decision to become the conscious potter of your own reality rather than remaining an unconscious passenger in your life. The transformation begins not with seeing massive external changes overnight, though those sometimes happen, but with noticing the subtle shifts that signal something fundamental has changed in your operating system. Maybe you wake up feeling different, with an emotional baseline that shifted in a direction you've been wanting for years. Maybe you find yourself making a decision that would have paralyzed you with doubt before, but now it simply feels clear and obvious. Maybe an opportunity appears that you would have overlooked in the past, but now you recognize it immediately because your perception has recalibrated. These first subtle but undeniable changes are the green shoots emerging from seeds you've planted, confirmation that the practice is working at levels beneath your conscious awareness. The revelations that unfold from this point forward happen naturally as you continue the 7-night cycle. Each evening, you're developing greater sensitivity to the golden window. Each morning, you're gathering evidence that something real is shifting. And by the end of those 7 nights, you're not the same person who started the practice. You've become someone who knows, through direct experience rather than belief, that consciousness can be consciously shaped during specific windows of opportunity. Write in the comments, "Tonight I begin," if you're ready to stop learning about this and start actually experiencing it for yourself. So here we are, at the threshold of something new in your own life. If you've made it this far, through every metaphor and revelation, through ancient wisdom and modern science, through the stories of Michael and Amanda and Brian, then something inside you has already recognized the truth of what we've been exploring together. You didn't stay for this long by accident. Some part of you, perhaps that deeper wisdom we've been talking about, knew this message was meant for you at exactly this moment in your journey. I want to invite you to become part of this community that's rediscovering these ancient practices and applying them to modern life. If the content we create here resonates with something real inside you, if it's giving you tools and understanding that actually make a difference, then subscribe to the channel. Not because I'm asking you to, but because you deserve to have access to this kind of exploration consistently. There's so much more to uncover together about consciousness, manifestation, and the hidden mechanics of transformation. And if this video connected with you, if something shifted or clicked into place as you listened, leave a comment saying, "This message was meant for me." I read every single comment, and there's something powerful about declaring your recognition publicly, about marking this moment as significant in your journey. It's its own kind of intention setting. Give this video a like if it served you, not as a favor to me, but as a way of acknowledging to yourself that you found value here, that this hour wasn't wasted but was actually an investment in understanding yourself and reality more deeply. Now there's a video right here that takes what we've explored today even further into practical application. It complements everything we've discussed perfectly, showing you additional techniques that amplify these nighttime practices. Click on it and continue with me there, because your transformation doesn't end with understanding. It deepens with continued exploration and application. Tonight, when you lie down to sleep, you're not the same person who started watching this video. You now know something you didn't know before. The only question is what you'll do with that knowledge. I'll see you in the next video, and more importantly, I'll meet you in that golden window where transformation becomes possible.